Sinners from the mind of Ryan Coogler in heavy collaboration with Michael B. Jordan, Ludwig Goransson, and a slew of others, and it is fantastic. But some of you guys have been really mean to me about this one. Me in the throes of a mental breakdown getting bullied for talking about the Thunderbolts over spitting out a Sinners video immediately when it came out. But to be fair, I did try to make a quick video on this just to encourage people to go out to the theater. Was not able to, thankfully. It didn't seem to hurt it. I think it is now the highest original grossing movie in 15 years. But hey, thank you for wanting to hear my stupid thoughts. Because yeah, of course I was going to cover this. Sinners is just so rich with lore and culture and unique on how it's bringing those genre elements to screen, dealing with my favorite style of movie monster. It is so easy to see how this just started as a more general horror movie set in the South, but had to bloom into so much more when learning more about that period and place and time. Everything here is so rich that you could really just find all these areas to do little spin-offs or sequels, but Coogler's been pretty clear that he just wants to move on to a new project and let this success be what it is. But hey, who knows what the future could bring? Maybe we'll get some like Sinners spin-off comic books. So before really diving in, even though pretty much everyone has seen it at this point, Sinners is about a young musician named Sammy with a once-in-a-generation talent being hired to play the opening night of his twin cousin's juke joint in 1932 Mississippi. They've got a want to build a legacy for the black community, and Sammy has big dreams of making it outside the preacher life his father has set for him. And the whole movie is just magnetic and sensual and alive, and how it swirls figuratively and literally through the eras of culture past, present, and future. There's a scene in this movie that is so incredibly unique and special, and how they brought it to life is so cool that like I can't put it into words, while also dealing with a really heavy subject matter like the exploitation of black culture, music being passed down, co-opted, and stolen through the ages. Even digging into some parallels with the Irish, but then the stark differences in how each side had to deal with that in America. The idea of assimilation to oppressors and who had the luxury of being able to do that without losing the core aspects of their identity. And you'll both see and hear it in the way this movie plays out, from the imagery to the music. Even getting into what people might have to give up of themselves to make it in the entertainment industry and how that can play into assimilation. And it's kind of easy to see how that can apply to Coogler's own career in Hollywood, so I'm so glad that this movie has been such a massive success and came with the agreement that after 25 years, he gets complete ownership of it. And that's on top of already having final cut of the movie now. He poured himself and his history into this movie and did the work to build a story in a time that feels authentic to multiple cultures, and he will be reaping the benefits of that work for years to come. It really is just such a fantastic celebration of culture while also working as a great horror and piece of history of like so many darker moments. As mentioned, the movie is set in 1932 Mississippi, when racism was gaining even more traction in the South, with lynchings increasing, Jim Crow laws still heavily in effect, pushing segregation, and a lot of people trying to prevent black people from even being able to make those communities. Right along with Coogler, this movie got to teach me so much about the Delta blues, and in particular how it worked as a blueprint for music in America. Coogler suggesting that it might be the most important contribution to American art. And I think it's just so cool that the more that he and Ludwig learned about that music, the greater the scope of the movie became, allowing Coogler to connect more with his own family and history and appreciate the things his loved ones loved. I know some people think there's some contradicting messaging here about how like culture can endure and stay strong through music, while also stating that this kind of talent attracts evil. But it's also kind of the point that bad people will always be the first in line to take from you. It's what you can do to stay true to yourself despite that. And this movie honestly takes about an hour before any solid horror element really starts to seep in outside a couple smaller scenes at like the 40-minute mark. And I think that makes this so special, like a better From Dusk Till Dawn, like no shade to that. This is just really good. And when it does start to ramp up, even that manages to get used to the greater themes within the story. It fits the bill for what I love seeing in horror that has a message that it can layer in those themes and those allegories and tell a story while still working as a horror if someone didn't want to put any additional thought into it, even though this movie is pretty well demanding that attention. From a technical standpoint, I think this thing is incredible. I drove to a different city to catch it a second time in IMAX once I realized how much of it was filmed specifically with that in mind. I really urge you guys to watch Ryan Coogler breaking that down on YouTube, because it'll absolutely make you appreciate the hell out of a lot of those creative choices even more. The music in this is spectacular as expected. Goransson is just a phenomenal composer and really cared about learning the culture surrounding the movie he was working with, and really found an amazing way to blend that music through history while bringing in black collaborators like Raphael Saadiq. The whole thing is locked in. They even do beats to match the match striking here. It's great. It's visually stunning, the performances are all great, I just love everything that this movie is. Like that moment of pure shock on Michael B. Jordan's face when he hears Miles Caton play for the first time in the movie is just so genuine. But yeah, if you somehow have not seen this movie yet, I urge you to do so, and if you have, hopefully maybe I can tell you some things that you didn't already know about in this video. But with all the traveling I've been doing lately and just generally trying to enjoy the summer weather, I've had to do a lot of my editing in public. And that's where today's sponsor Raycon comes in handy. Whether I'm on a plane, by a lake, or taking advantage of my new folding bike, did you know they made folding bikes? Raycon's everyday headphones have me covered. And you might be wondering, Amanda, is it safe to bike and wear over-ear headphones? Well, friends, just like their little bud brothers, the everyday headphones have awareness mode, meaning that I can pay attention to everything going on around me while listening to my music or a podcast. But when I'm in a plane or in a coffee shop, I can just pop on that active noise cancellation and drown out distractions. And all for under $100, a bargain! With the latest model's 40-hour battery life, I can use these bad boys for days and not need to charge them, and if for some reason I forget to do that when the time comes, they have a quick charge feature where 15 minutes gets you 2 hours of battery life. And as always, my favorite feature is comfort. I need to be able to wear these for hours on end, and in the comfort department, Raycon never lets me down. So go to buyraycon.com/Jedi15 to save 15% off Raycon's best-selling headphones, brought to you by Raycon. So let's dive in and talk about what this movie's doing. Right from the get-go, it's setting us up with that supernatural and spiritual element by introducing the idea of people having the gift of making music so true that it transcends all planes of existence, conjuring from the past and the future. The concept of these people exists across cultures, and as much as they can conjure beauty, they can also conjure evil. And that's what we're gonna see here today, baby! Cut right to October 16 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, home of the Crossroads. Robert Johnson is said to have sold his soul to the devil for musical ability. I remembered that little tidbit from Supernatural. And even though that Crossroads legend originated here, that is absolutely not what Coogler is trying to convey. No one in this movie is selling their soul to the devil for talent. The point is very much that evil preys and tries to steal what already is, not what it can create. But here we have Sammy shakily driving his way up to a church, face slashed open with nothing but the partial neck of a guitar in his bloodied hand, with a plea from his father, a man of God, to leave his sinning ways behind. And for this, those sinning ways is Sammy's call to music, or specifically the fame he wants from playing it. Flashes of some untold horrors while his father desperately pleads with him to drop the guitar before cutting us to one day earlier. And I love a movie that can start us off with something with a degree of intensity and then bring us back to show how it came to be. When it's done well, it is so satisfying. So the day before introduces us to Michael B. Jordan's characters, who are obviously prominent in all of the marketing. They are twins named Smoke and Stack. They went off to war, got up to something in Chicago on their return, and now they're back in Mississippi with a pile of cash to open up a juke joint that very night. And they're just cool. Like, look at these fancy little duds. They're buying an old barn from this penguin-looking guy.
You boys twins? Nah, we cousins.
Pegging him as a Klan member even though he says they don't exist anymore.
Klan don't exist no more.
You sure about that?
And we gotta know that their attitude towards him here would have been very unusual at the time.
Ain't no boys here. I just grown men and grown man bullets.
That is a real, genuine confidence they've spent years fighting for. But we get back to Sammy, where immediately keeps working on this idea of him sinning and turning away from God by wanting to play music for people who'd rather get drunk than be with their families, and not at all focusing on the power of music to bring people together. Because, like, hey man, why not both? You can love your family and have a little bit of fun.
You keep dancing with the devil, one day it's gonna follow you home.
Immediately picked up by the brothers with the promise of getting him home in one piece, and yeah, I guess that's kind of true based on what we saw at the beginning of the movie, just a little bit maimed. Now, even though they're twins and spend all their time together, the two do very much have distinct personalities. You got Stack, who really wants to start everything with a bang. It's gotta be that night, while Smoke's worried about the whole thing being a big failure if they rush. Smoke is more reserved, more conscious, the still one, as Jordan described him, while Stack is a lot more restless. Jordan specifically worked to make sure they would have different body language by wearing smaller shoes for Stack so he'd come across more restless. Stack's headstrongness wins, so the two end up splitting up to make sure they have enough time to get everything together, and that really does just serve to help flesh out everything going on in this town. I'm sure it also helps to not have to have them both on screen at the same time being played by the same person, but it's still a benefit of seeing more of the town. Smoke heads into the city, where you get this real Wild West, mess around, get shot attitude, and the brothers have a reputation even though they've been gone for 7 years.
7 years ain't long enough to forget about us.
But you still just get that vibe of community building, encouraging this young girl to ask for more money to watch his truck, building loyalty, and just making this world feel really lived in. in. The people trying to build and the people trying to take, even with the warning of who they might be taking from. Shooting people in the ass, it's like me playing Call of Duty. It's unintentionally, it just goes right for their ass or their balls. I get that some people think this movie's on the longish side, it's just under 2.5 hours, but they still managed to get an incredible amount of backstory in without it feeling ham-fisted. Like we find out pretty early on that there's a rumor they killed their own father, but Stack said it was actually just Smoke after his dad knocked him out. But even in this moment where Smoke really has to talk big to make sure no one thinks they'll be easy targets down the line, he makes sure that someone else is able to take care of these guys and pays for them to get patched up. Then you get the Chows running 2 grocery stores on the same street, one for black people and one for white people, all with this chatter about how the white people used to have their own side of town entirely and now things are mingling more, fully in line with those rising racial tensions we know are happening, or at least the overtly hostile rising tensions. I know some people question whether Asian people would actually be able to cross the racial line of this era, and yeah, a cultural advisor on the film was involved in a docu-series that outlined specific instances of Chinese-owned grocery stores in the Mississippi Delta, serving black communities when white stores obviously wouldn't. But just like in this movie, that often resulted in having 2 different stores on opposite sides of the streets, one for black people, one for white people, specifically linking the Min Sang grocery store. I'll link to the video I referenced this from down below, which I believe is how Ryan Coogler actually found that consultant, Dolly Lee. And this scene also gives us another little hint about how the brothers might have got their money, that they hit it big, but not at those Chicago casinos. So 1930s was Prohibition era, so Chicago had a lot going on. There's rumors that the boys were working for Capone. So there's a shot that they didn't just come back to be around familiar devils, they maybe had to run away. Meanwhile, you've got Stack trying to teach Sammy the art of pleasing a woman, telling him they won the guitar they gave him off of Charlie Patton, but they'll later reveal that it was their father's, so it's just that kind of like generational passing down. When they pull up on one of their other planned performers, Delta Slim, who they managed to lure in with Irish beer from Chicago. So now we have the mention of Chicago, Capone, and the Irish. And if you know anything about that time in Chicago and anything about a lot of areas in the United States at the time, you'll know that Capone and the Italian mob had a long-standing rivalry with the Irish gangs. Busy boys, it seems. Heartbreakers too. This is where we get Hailee Steinfeld as Mary, who is great in this role while being younger than I would have pegged for a romantic interest for Michael B. Jordan. And this is a woman scorned. She's pissed as hell because I guess Stack just up and abandoned her, and now he's back the day after her mother's funeral, which just feels like insult to injury. With Smoke, it's a little bit more somber. He had a real standing relationship with a woman named Annie and the child they'd lost, but outside that sorrow, this woman has it and she knows she has it. This is the type of woman that people go to war for. I can't even repeat some of what she says, played fantastically by Wunmi Mosaku. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. But there's an added layer here that she does hoodoo and gave Smoke something to ward off evil, which will be relevant. And he keeps running his mouth about how he's been around the world, been in a bunch of different wars, and he's never actually seen anything to prove that real evil is out there. But she's like, well, maybe that's actually evidence that what I do for you works. She's also the first one to actively call out Smoke on his bullshit for clearly having wronged someone to get the money to buy that much land and property from a white man. So yeah, not everyone is enamored with the legend of the twins. And now, 40 minutes into the runtime, we get a little taste of that horror element. A man running through a field, seemingly dropping a little bit from the sky, steaming and boiled up in the sun, apparently being chased by Native Americans, reasoning with these 2 racist hicks about how they took his wife, really playing that aspect up when he sees the Klan robes.
Klan don't exist no more.
The lie detector determined that was a lie. At this point, I was like, yeah, that's a vampire and they're about to invite it in. Now, this is actually one of the avenues where, while I don't think this movie needs a sequel or spin-offs, I would love to have a movie about the vampire hunting Native Americans. That's so cool. And even though he knows this woman hates him, he is still pleading with her to let them help before taking off at the last daylight. Too late though, Bert's already become the first snack of the evening. Another little fun point there, Bert is Peter from July Talk, which I actually didn't peg it until my friend Tyler pointed it out, but Jack O'Connell here as Remick is a genuine, terrifying delight. Which we will get back to, but now the juke joint's in full swing, the married girl Sammy's into shows up and everything. Everyone here truly is sinning, as well as Mary, who is also apparently married. Being of the time, I guess women really just did have to do that for self-preservation, but Mary is very unhappy with the hand she's been dealt. But they even find a way to make all that layered. Stack didn't leave because he wanted to, he left her to try to keep her safe from being attacked for being with a black man. But she has a connection to that community because her grandfather was black, and she doesn't care what the people would think about them, but Stack's genuinely afraid for her. But that brings us to the most incredible scene of music, Sammy playing I Lied to You. And this is quite literally the type of scene that doesn't feel like it's ever really been done before, and as Sammy's playing, we're getting those reminders of the evil it might attract. But it's just so spectacular when you just get this electric guitar ripping in, channeling something from a future that might even be beyond our own. DJs, rock, opera, tribal tribal, percussion, rap, music from all over the world and every era, melding in a way that should be impossible but somehow makes perfect sense and works for how it's evolved around the world and through cultures. And Sammy's just continuing that tradition that's been going on through the decades, oftentimes spreading in secret to avoid persecution, and it's just going to continue being passed on long after we're all gone. So just take a little moment from later in the movie. Sammy reveals to Smoke that he's planning on leaving town pretty immediately to make a name for himself in music. But all Smoke hears in that is that Sammy might unintentionally be following in their footsteps and getting caught up in trouble. So very similar to how his own father's telling him not to be a sinner, you've got this person that you think is going to be on your side telling you not to do the exact thing he did, when all he wants to do is share his soul through music.
You like making music? Make church music. Leave all this here improper shit to us.
Two sides of a coin with the exact same concerns. But Sammy says he's willing to die rather than spend the rest of his life on a plantation or hiding away. Reminding us again that while the Smokestack twins are absolutely commanding the screen for so much of this movie, the story really is Sammy's. Reminder that they're not trying to take his soul in exchange for some kind of talent. They want his soul for the power he already has. Bringing us back though, that music just keeps swirling, people dancing all types of dances while it looks like the place is burning down. But that's just what it looks like to the evil lurking outside, because it brings Remick right to their door, and he wants what Sammy has. He wants that connection to the past, to his ancestry, his story, something Remick's lost and is desperate to get back. So now shit's gonna hit the fan. They approach as humble musicians, but also weird as fuck. And the song they start singing is ominous as hell.
I pick poor, I be clean.
A classic where the original recording by Gishu Wiley is actually on the Sinner's soundtrack, but with vampires singing it with a little twang, coordinated moves that almost feel animatronic, the meaning of the song starts to feel a lot more sinister, flipping it right on that culture it was written by. Not that it's really getting them anywhere, they don't want them to come inside. And I know some people were like, oh my god, look at the segregation happening, not letting the white people in, but that is just ignoring historical realities of a time where a black person existing in the wrong spot could get them wrongly accused of a crime. This is about self-preservation, because I'm gonna take you back to an earlier moment of the film with Delta Slim telling a story after they drive by a bunch of prisoners that he knows working in a field. Talks about how it was pretty typical for the Klan to just fabricate stories about them and cops just going along with it to send them to jail, and the only thing that saved Slim and his pal was their ability to play music that white people enjoyed. And while Slim was content to stay around, continue playing, and drink his money away, his friend had bigger aspirations and wanted to leave town, but when they saw him turn up at the train station with all that money, they didn't believe it could be his, so they made up a crime for him to have committed and then lynched him. And while the story's being told, it's literally just conjuring up sound of that history. First, the music they would have been playing to get out of trouble before it switches to harsh voices of the attackers and his death. It's just really somber but a fantastic detail before he starts humming his own blues, essentially teaching Sammy where it all came from, that pain and that resilience. All those prisoners singing through their hardships. Then on top of that, the scene goes to show us that while slavery has technically been abolished, this legal form of slavery by wrongfully imprisoning people remains, along with the miles of cotton fields, where even the free people aren't paid real money to picket. So to have this place of their own where they're playing for their own people and not as a circus attraction is important. Protecting that is important.
What if they just came to sing? And what if somebody spilled something on them?
And again, even without all that, these guys are fucking weird. I used to work at a bar. Sometimes you can just turn people away if they're acting weird. So the brothers turn them away, but it's hard not to be tempted by that money they claim to have when most of the money coming in is plantation money over American dollars. Without money, they can't keep the place alive, but that vice for cash might end up being their downfall. So Mary decides to go suss them out a little bit, and much like Annie can also call the brothers on their shit, puts it together that they likely robbed the Irish of their beer, the Italians of their wine, money from both, and let each side blame the other. Again, just showing that there's this progression of their actions potentially leading to an inevitable downfall in their search for freedom through power and money. Now, when she gets out there, they're singing Go Lassie Go or Wild Mountain Time, a Scottish and Irish folk song, depending on what the lyrics are, that also is typically about inviting someone to join in on an activity, which you could spin in a darker way to mean luring someone to them. But there's something else that I found interesting here. The lineage of that song is hard to peg in terms of the Irish side, like it did originate in Scotland, and then a different version was written and adapted by an Irish musician. But I feel like the version in the movie that they're singing is using verses that wouldn't have been written in 1932. So did they literally channel Irish music from the future? I feel like that can't be the case, because that's exactly what Remick needs Sammy for. Maybe it was just one of these things passing around before it ended up being recorded or officially documented, but it's a hauntingly beautiful rendition of the song here, but they have indeed lured a young lass with their glowing eyes vaguely shielded.
I would have liked to have saved your mother from her fate.
Oh no, look at all that vampire venom drool. And sadly, she turns her back on them after whipping out that gun, which is a terrible mistake, even if they were just regular people. And that's Mary turned.
You gonna let me in?
Oh no! Evil Hailee Steinfeld making moves on Stack. So now people are just getting picked off one by one. Sadly, they nab sweet old cornbread next. Mary gets to Stack pretty fast inside once she's been invited in.
It's not what it looks like.
It's just such a good line, but Smoke, no hesitation, 2 guns a-blazing.
I started blasting. Bang!
And not a damn thing happens to her, so now we're in the bloodbath. Because Slim makes a massive mistake of telling people to go home, which means they're all just getting picked off one by one outside. At least Andy knows what's up.
Admit to it.
Admit to what?
That you dead.
Which is good, because right after the cornbread jump scare, Stack's tapping at the door. It is very damn tragic, though. Smoke's gotta watch his twin die, then see him come back as a vampire? A soul trapped in a body, unable to cross over to the ancestors until they've been released from their bodies again. I love that Annie was just ready with the pickled garlic juice, though. A nice flip up on holy water. I actually really like how typically so much vampire lore does have a direct reaction to Christianity and that side of religion, and this movie is really kind of going out of its way to reject a lot of that when it comes to dealing with the vampires. Obviously, that's tying into the idea of sinners and Sammy's father and how they're expressing things and what's been forced upon people, but it's just interesting. And one of the aspects I really like about the vampires that really plays into this idea of like assimilated cultures and stuff is that they kind of go with a hive mind mentality for them. Like they can all act independently, but Remick is their master, and any time any of them are changed, all of his information gets shared with them and vice versa. So any history, story, language, talent you have gets assimilated by the group through that main vampire, Remick. So they all start to dance together in this trance-like state while singing The Rocky Road to Dublin, full Irish accent on display. Now getting amped up with that added history and music of the black people he's just consumed. And as mentioned earlier, it starts showing those parallels between the black experience in America to the treatment of the Irish by British colonizers. Rocky Road to Dublin is about a man leaving home and realizing that the further away he gets, the only people willing to help him are people from his home, saving him from being mobbed in England. A story that Remick could relate to from a much earlier point in persecution that he would have experienced growing up in Ireland. But now he's been in America for a while and he is desperately trying to reconnect with that history and culture he feels was taken from him and that he had to leave behind, and he sees Sammy as the key to that. Because even that Irish dancing is something that he wouldn't have had the luxury of doing at certain points in history due to British penal laws. Not that it stopped the dancing, but it was an act of rebellion that was passed from village to village, much like the way songs and music and that aspect of culture was being passed on secretly oftentimes through communities. Not to say we're supposed to feel bad for Remick here. He is trying to steal and trap Sammy's soul and plans to work his way through the whole town to get it, but he is still trying to find some type of community that he's lost, promising them what he sees as salvation, a way to overthrow their oppressors by largely giving up who they are and becoming a different type of oppressor.
This world already left you for dead. Won't let you build. Won't let you fellowship together.
But still terrifying. I know some people just find these vampires to be really goofy, but honestly, it is kind of how silly they are at times around all of that, like, menacing attacks they can do that kind of makes them feel more threatening. Like when it was revealed that Bo Chow was changed, which sucks. I really wanted them to live. It's while this guy is getting massacred by cornbread and he just saunters up casually to tell Grace that the car's ready.
Wanna go? We got the car all warmed up.
Like they can't even pretend to be normal. And now he and Remick are threatening to go after their daughter Lisa if they don't let them in or send Sammy out. Again, to gain access to his ability to musically bridge through history so Remick can see his ancestors again. And again, I find it very interesting that he's trying to steal this thing for himself to try to get back the things that were stolen from him. But there's a little flip here that it's not just about stealing, it's also by being able to share his stories with Sammy too, recognizing the ways music can connect cultures through time, but in a way that seems very homogenized. Rather than being able to share that with one another on an even playing field, it is predatory. This is also where Remick drops an interesting tidbit of information because he turned those clan members, they were doomed no matter what happened, because if it wasn't him, the clan was coming back the next morning to kill them all.
This here is a slaughterhouse.
We're gonna start ourselves a new clan based on love.
It's so goofy. Like, it's just such an interesting dynamic. There is a genuine monstrous evil to them, and it's very unsettling, but then there's that unnatural goofiness, but then this very weird, strong desire for connection to keep the people that they've loved together, to build from that. But again, the way that it's being presented by Remick and all the people he's changing is through assimilation, again, which is what a lot of Irish immigrants would have done when they first reached America, to try to avoid being treated as outsiders, which they were for a very large piece of time when they first arrived in America. But with Remick still trying to desperately hold on to his culture, that he's willing to do the same thing to Sammy's history, presenting this as an opportunity for that freedom they've been fighting for their whole lives, when it's really anything but that. And the immortality they're offering here in the literal sense is also something that you see a lot with artists of any type. You're kind of promised this idea of immortality with things you're created, and you might sign these very predatory deals, giving away your life's work or just completely abandoning your authenticity. So Remick really ends up being an interesting type of predator. The person who comes in claiming to want to help, to build you up, but wants to bleed you dry all the same, pun intended. Strip your individuality in exchange for what he claims is a better life, and for this weird version of community that they already had, because he wants that for himself. He is desperate for the one that was taken from him. And of course, as mentioned earlier on, how this relates to music from the Black community being stolen and co-opted through the ages and very rarely ever properly credited. But continuing on, things obviously need to escalate, and this is where a lot of people want to put some strong blame on Grace for letting them all in. But I kind of get it. It was to save her daughter. At this point, they clearly plan to take over the entire city. They have openly threatened to do this to her daughter. If they don't do something while the numbers are kind of at the size they are now, there is not going to be a chance to stop them down the line. I get that it's selfish in the moment, but what mother wouldn't act in desperation to save her child? Especially after she just had to see the love of her life be twisted in some way she can't recognize anymore. At least she's not summoning a demon into another child to try to resurrect hers. You should check out my Bring Her Back video if that reference didn't mean anything to you. Yeah, she literally tragically goes down in a blaze though. Very wild stuff. I don't necessarily want to say blaze of glory, but at least she took someone out with her. Now, tragically, that means that pretty much everyone here is going to die because they are severely outnumbered and outpowered. Notably, Annie, who Smoke then has to kill because he promised her he would, and what a fucking terrible night for him. Man's lost everyone. But what I found so interesting here is that they are genuinely distraught when Smoke stabs Annie to prevent her turning, because to them, that was actually killing her. No! At least for the people who know those in the community, they mean it when they say they want to create a big old family of vampires. It's not just pure vampiric hunger. Though there's definitely a good amount of that, because Slim sacrifices himself by cutting his arm to give people time to escape. Before that, though, Stack pulls Mary back when she's freaking out about Annie dying, maybe to stop Smoke from trying to kill her, but will realize that the hoodoo pouch is actually working for him. They literally can't bite him. Annie, why didn't you have one for yourself? I don't know why so many of them retreated in this exact moment. Maybe it's because Remick was planning to ambush them at a different entrance.
Sammy!
Okay, that one made me giggle too, because it reminds me of Bill in True Blood saying, Suke! But like a parody version of that. Tragically, Sammy's love interest, who also has a hell of a voice and confidence, dies here trying to save him. Stabs Remick in the back, but just not far enough to the left there, darling. And at this point, it seems kind of lost. Smoke is facing off against Stack, and Remick's got Sammy in his clutches, but then he starts to pray. And Remick starts to match it with his horde, explaining that the man who stole his home from him as a child forced those words on him. And I think he does just mean like the English version of those words, like when Cromwell came over in the 1600s. That seems to track more with the history he's been explaining he had, the type of music he sings and the way he dances, and the fact that that is the more direct parallel of the persecution of Black people in America compared to what the Irish went through in that era. It could be a bit further back than the 1600s, like maybe the 1300s. I'm just thinking that because of Cromwell, but it easily could have gone back to the 1100s when England first started colonizing Ireland. The coins he showed Mary also seem to match Irish gold coins of the era, but that's harder to confirm. There were a lot of different gold coins going around. But I get why a lot of people wanted to jump on it being pre-Christian Ireland of around like the 4th or 5th century. But as far as we know, that was a steady transition of introducing Catholicism and Christianity versus the brutal colonization and forced conversion to Protestant by the British, which it does just feel like this movie is conveying more. Coogler specifically wanted that vampire to be someone who could understand what the people he was preying on were going through. And again, in all his chilling ways, he's still offering Sammy this option of technically being brutalized as a good thing, but it does give Sammy just enough time to bash him with the guitar. And while those plates, I think, are usually made of nickel, this one here might be silver based on how much damage it did and how Remick's steaming up. And just as Annie realized, anything that strongly affects the master reverberates down through the chain. And the distraction of all the vampires being in pain gives Smoke just enough time to stab Remick and get to Sammy as the sun comes up, giving us a vampire burning the likes I haven't seen since Midnight Mass. And for all he was seeking, while I don't really have a lot of sympathy for him, I'd like to think that in that moment, Remick finally got what he truly wanted, that connection to his past, but just in the afterlife when he could be free with his ancestors. His death was intense though, it was an entire fire vortex, bringing us full circle to Sammy refusing to put that guitar, not for Smoke, not for his dad, as electric notes start to ring out like the future's calling. All the words his father is using to imply that the music is turning Sammy away from spirituality when it's the music that brought that to him. It brought him to the people who made him who he is, that allowed him to spread that culture and connection. That music is how he saves his soul and preaches. While Smoke seems to be prepping for that promised clan visit, thinking of the way that his actions contributed to the losses that were suffered, ready to go out guns ablazing, which he does, finally getting the chance to reconnect with his family. Tragic, but you know he wouldn't want to be alive under the circumstances. Leaving us with Sammy driving off on his own, jumping us to the same day 60 years later in 1992 Chicago, which I just found out was actually the day that the original Candyman released on October 16th of 1992, which is obviously a major piece of black horror with Tony Todd and the origin of that character. It's also set in Chicago. I'm assuming that was intentional and it was a nice little nod. And yeah, we see that electric guitar we heard swelling in the church was Sammy's future self, who did achieve all the things he wanted. Played by Buddy Guy, which is cool for so many reasons. Someone you could argue would be one of those generational talents that transcends history. Bringing us to a mid-credits scene. Sammy gets a visit after the show by Stack and Mary. Because I need you to remember a key rule of media: if you don't see a body, they might not be dead.
Come on in.
And just from those words, he knows what might be coming in. And I gotta be honest, they look cool as heck in the 90s. And honestly, them being the two surviving vampires feels like a nice little callback to this moment.
Rotten hell, Stack.
Save your trifling ass room.
Not quite in hell, but undead vampire seems close enough. Look, I'm not saying I want my soul to go a little evil wonky and be trapped in a body that hungers forever, but like, they make it look pretty darn good. So you remember that Stack pulled Mary away after they killed Annie, and then the last time we see Stack is with Smoke hesitating over him with a stake.
Sorry I couldn't keep you safe. Don't be sorry. You always did.
Yeah, he couldn't do it. He couldn't take out his own brother and just makes him promise to leave Sammy alone. But now that Sammy's approaching the end, Stack wants to offer him immortality.
I think I've seen enough of this place.
No hard feelings there. They just want him to grant them one last song of the real, with what is either a replacement of the guitar or a massive restoration from what remained. Because yeah, I feel like there'd be an importance to the tools that helped make that music that spread the culture as much as there would be to the people spreading it. But the final thoughts they leave on is that before the sun went down, that was one of the best days of their lives. That despite being an immortal, young, powerful vampire, that was the last time Stack felt truly free. Because even with all the power he gained, it was in exchange for something genuine. Ending on the song, The Last Time I Seen the Sun, which really feels like it's a song about understanding the limited time we have, that so many things can change in an instant, so do what you can to make your own place and live authentically. The freedoms that people have had at various points of their life are never guaranteed and always worth fighting for. Leaving us with a nice little epilogue to close out the movie, Sammy playing his guitar in the church, a moment from one of his flashbacks, specifically when his father was begging for his soul. And it's him singing this nice bluesy version of This Little Light of Mine, which is kind of essentially what he did. He let his light, his talent, his soul shine for the world. That music was his salvation and his gift. So that's pretty well Sinners. There's so much more that can be poured over and analyzed, and I will probably add to this after the fact, and I just think it's a beautiful piece of cinema. I think one of the only complaints is that like some of the callbacks might be a little heavy-handed, but it's not really a detriment to it at all. There's just so many fun details, like the way that it acknowledges hoodooism as another piece of their culture and history that was often forced out of them as slaves, as a force for good and not evil. There's also a little bit of an interactive element on Spotify with these fake news articles talking about rising tensions between the Italians and Irish in Chicago over missing liquor, how two people robbed a bank in Clarksdale back in the 20s, clearly what the twins got up to before heading to Chicago. Then the one I found the most interesting is a clipping from 1911 about an Irish immigrant shipwreck with no survivors, but the boat was covered in blood. So that is when Remick would have made his way to America, and also feels like a nice little nod to Nosferatu. 11 years before Nosferatu had been filmed, but just that idea of like a ship crashing into a harbor with all of the people on board dead. Yeah, there's just a lot of really cool things about this movie. But yeah, that is Sinners. Let me know what you guys are thinking down below. Is there anything I missed or something that you thought was really cool that maybe I didn't touch on in a certain way? Let me know down below. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing, and all my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.